Welcome to the Jedi Chronicles series. The host today is Master Yao, founder of the Grand Trine system. He is a Tantra extraordinaire and accomplished in several natural life systems. After completion of the Marmor project in 1997, he was raised to the rank of Master. He was later inducted into the International Circle of Masters. Master Yao is the author of 6 published books and many private select manuscripts. I've known Master Yao for 2 years now, and in that time he has helped me become the best version of myself possible. And I hope you really enjoy this series.
Welcome back. My name is Master Yao. These are the Chronicles of Master Yao. This episode we're going to discuss what we call the goddess facade. If we look back on Black history, each decade we could assign a theme. And these themes are all based on the same central false belief that blacks can progress without making any internal changes. In other words, all the problems that we encounter are in white society, basically. The white economy, this, that, and the other. And if whites just get their act together, everything is going to be okay. But blacks don't have to make any changes, any major changes. Basically, this is a false hope. We think white society is supposed to change, but white society is not going to change. And in the last 100 years, it has not changed. It's had the same agenda. But, blacks cling to this illusion that it will change, that whites are going to get themselves together, and this society is going to correct itself, and everything is going to be okay. But there's some glaring problems in black society that need to be addressed. Let's go decade by decade and look at the internal social movement that dominated that decade, and let's look at what the overall, the external, the major society was doing at that time in respect to blacks. In the 1960s, we had civil rights internally. In the 1970s, deconstruction. In other words, after civil rights, blacks began to integrate. They had the right to integrate, and they exercised that right. In doing this, they decided to abandon all of this infrastructure that they had been building since the Civil War. So we had all of these factories, stores, schools, hospitals, and all of these systems and stock exchanges and stuff. And blacks just, in like basically 10, 15 years, we abandoned it. That was the 1970s. In the 1980s, it was feminism. In the 1990s, it was what we called African consciousness. 2000, social media. 2010, we saw the dawn of the goddess movement. But let's look at what's going on externally, outside the black community, in the overall society. In the 1960s, whites created welfare in inner cities. They basically set up a defense mechanism to push back against black integration. That was very, very effective. Just like the wall they're trying to build against immigration from Mexico. Whites never wanted to integrate, and they didn't. It was, it looked like it on the surface, but it never really happened. In the 1970s, when blacks were giving up their infrastructure, whites were sending jobs that blacks had gotten overseas. So blacks got the right to integrate, moved north and took jobs in the industrial heartland. Whites just sent the jobs overseas and closed the mills down. Urban industry basically collapsed because whites decided that they would rather have it collapse than create this economy for blacks. In the 1980s, urban gentrification, whites began to come into the cities that they had basically messed up in the 60s and take it back over again, displacing the blacks. In the 1990s, we had the war on drugs, in other words, the war on black men, putting them in jail. and at the same time a war on the health through drugs, in other words prescription drugs, to destroy blacks and whites for that matter with diabetes and all kinds of other issues that the drugs that they prescribed to you caused. So you had a double war, sending black men into jail and sending black people into ill health. In the 2000s, we had middle class jobs basically eliminated. So they eliminated the industrial class jobs in the 1970s and 80s. The 1990s and the 2000s, they basically, the office type, service type jobs that were high paying or middle class were eliminated almost completely. In 2010 was the time of the right wing agenda. Eventually Trump came on the scene, but before Trump, even during the Obama years, there was this agenda of whatever wasn't already destroyed in black society, let's destroy that and mess it up. So we got this internal agenda and this external agenda. And tonight I'm focusing mainly on the last 10 years, this 2010 through 2020, this goddess movement, which in my opinion, is just the latest in a series of failed social movements that's destined for failure from the beginning, has no chance of success. So, I mean, we look at the, when black women embraced feminism in the 1980s, it's like, well, why would you do that when this was the time when the black family was at its weakest? The black men were losing their jobs from jobs being exported overseas. People were in the process of moving from the South to the North still. It didn't really stop, it stopped that decade. But the families in transition, grandparents separated from grandbabies. And at that time, black women embraced a doctrine of feminism. Couldn't have happened at a worse time. So in the 1990s, same thing. Black men adopted this whole thing of African spirituality or a higher spirit, higher consciousness or whatever. But in all of these movements, common theme, you don't attack the actual root cause that's going on the ground. You're dealing with these surface type movements that attack the surface iconic type things, and you're dealing with that, and that's it. And but you're not really down here on the ground dealing with the basic issues, which, what are we talking about? We're talking about economics, religion, sex, cultural vacuums in terms of, not having a culture, leadership, things like that. We didn't do that. When the black man in the 1990s was dealing with this whole African consciousness thing, you had a lot of black symbolism, a lot of books being sold. You had a lot of people, learning about ancient Egypt and African culture and things like that, which were good, but they weren't applying it to the now, to what's happening right now. So you had black men who, could talk about the dynasties of Egypt, but couldn't pay their rent. Guys walking around with hats and stuff and, 6 kids from 6 different women. So you're like, okay, we're talking about African spirituality, but we're not really applying it to anything real. And that's exactly what's happening with the goddess movement today, in this decade. It's like, it's symbolism, but it's not dealing with the reality on the ground. It's still waiting for an outside force, an external force, to fix stuff. It's basically saying, okay, we're waiting for these people out here who've already declared themselves your enemy. We're waiting for them to fix their thing. We can't force them to do it. We're going to protest in March that they do it, but really, we got no ability to force them. Well, we don't think we do. But, that's where we're hanging our hat. We're depending on that. So, it just doesn't work like that. That's not how the world works. And people know this, but somehow still they cling to these illusions. So, in this decade from 2010 to 2020, it's the goddess movement. And I guess, what we could say is that the black woman has come on the world scene, has come on the world stage, whether it's however you want to look at it. What's different about it in the past is that the woman sees herself separate from the black man. It's a movement where she's moving and she's not associating herself with men. She's separated from them. She's like, okay, men are over here, I'm over there. And she's moving forward as a separate social entity, seemingly apart from overall black culture. In other words, we see for the first time, a gender split where women see themselves apart from black people. They see themselves as their own separate social entity, black men over here, kids over there, black women over there. And they're not dealing, it's the same thing, they're dealing with iconic issues, surface issues. They're not dealing with economics, religion, sex, that kind of thing. It will be remembered as the decade that her relationship with the black man hit its lowest point. The goddess movement is bipolar, as all of these movements were. When I say bipolar, they're rotating between these two themes, both of which are an illusion. So, you'll see on the one hand the surface, the iconic stuff that looks good. You see Michelle Obama becomes the first lady. Beyonce achieves superstar status above and beyond what anybody ever dreamed. People like you just see black women in acting, modeling, beauty industry, entertainment. They all just came to the front of the line. Boom, here I am. And it looks good. The Williams sisters in tennis and whatever, that's kind of how that looks. But still, again, the institutes, the institutions, the economy, the family, none of that was changed. So while this iconic stuff is happening, and women are all calling themselves goddesses and stuff, underneath that, down on the ground, things are getting worse. It's not so pretty. So female head of households skyrockets, up to 2009. And so what we have is basically, there's so many female heads of household now that we can officially say that black family has died, that it doesn't exist anymore. It's so rare. So that's the decade of the demise of the two-parent black family. Child support payments eclipse other sources of income to become the third largest source of income for the black woman. So child support becomes an industry that rivals the prison industry. In fact, it becomes the third largest source of income for black women, and it becomes, approximately 12 to 17%, depending on what state you're in, of all incarceration of black men is connected to child support, contempt of court based on child support. So you're going to see that the time span of relationships drops to such a short time. In other words, the average time that relationships last, that you could basically say that relationships cease to exist as a form of men and women getting together. That, that instead of it lasting, the average relationship lasting years, it's down to months. And in some cases, you have men and women who haven't been in relationships for a long, long time and not seeking any. Household income decline because this whole dynamic with the child support, with the divorce, and with the collapse of the industrial sector, the income of black men just boom, just dived and crashed. and because the income of black men crashed, especially as a consequence of child support incarcerations, the income of the black woman died too. Crazy thing. The worst thing that happened during this time is that we see a dramatic increase in attention and focus away from domestic issues and into such things as social media, cell phones, TV, and things like that, blogs. In other words, there's a dramatic shift in attention from stuff that will fix the problem to stuff just looking at external things, basically time consumers that don't do anything, that don't produce anything. So the other side of this bipolar thing is that you see that the goddess movement has given black women a martyr complex. She becomes the endless victim. And her rage is now redirected. Used to be, in the civil rights time, it was directed at the society that's oppressing her. But now it's directed at the black man. And this is the product of the lesbian and feminist culture. So black men become the enemy now. And it's like, okay, you say, well, how could this happen? Well, that's basically what happened. Feminists promote the women as guiltless, high-minded, beautiful, righteous, all of this kind of stuff. And they use the opposite adjectives to describe all men, black men specifically, so that we have this martyr complex, this perpetual victim complex, that women are perpetually the victim of men, that everything, that the entire experience in society is men victimizing women, that all this constant rapes and constant victimizations and constant denial of privileges, and females don't make as much as men, and this is the entire reality that they're portraying life as being like, which is just not the case. These things exist, but they exist as part of a bigger picture. But, this knee-jerk reaction is again, when a group refuses to look internally and looks externally for the fault and for the problem to be resolved. And in the goddess facade decade, it's, black women saying black men are responsible for all the problems, and after that, whites. And so black women don't have any fault, no role to play, and nothing they don't got no nothing to fix. It's a repeat of old mistakes. The same mistake that black men made during the civil rights time, during the African consciousness time. It's, we don't have anything to fix. The problem is out there. You can say the Hotep movement failed. And basically it failed because you got all these spiritual books on sale, but people aren't applying it because, again, they're not looking at the problem as being internal. They're not doing any self-examination and any change in the main root things that run society, economics, religion, these types of things. They're looking at the symbolism instead. So, blacks in the civil rights time are saying, we shall overcome, and then integrating into a society that hates them. Why would you do that? So basically, they just added more issues to an already almost insurmountable social problem. So not only do you have the social problems that you were given after slavery, now you've got the social problems of trying to get along with neighbors that hate you, trying to rely on an infrastructure that's trying to destroy you. You're going to, now you're dependent on someone else to supply your food, clothing, this, that, and the other, and you're depending on them to employ you, which they don't want to. And this is the same thing with the Almighty Goddess decade. It's It's the same BS, different decade. It's going to fail. It's off track. If you look at women, they lack spiritual development. They're not goddesses. They lack sexual evolution. They don't know how to engage in a relationship successfully. No, they're not interested in learning. They don't have economic responsibility. You've got people claiming to be goddesses with weaves, and they're buying the hair from Korean shops on the corner while the black hair care shops go broke. Something's wrong with that picture. I mean, if you're saying that you're a goddess, but you don't have relationships, you don't have a family, you don't have any long-term agenda for your culture and your community, how is that? Child support has eclipsed divorce and its catastrophic economic impact on black men. And I'm not saying that this is black women's fault, because what the conservative alternate right did was they saw this thing and they said, okay, let's take this child support thing and let's start adding all these conditions to it. So then child support became a way to revoke passports, security clearances, to ruin your credit score, car registrations, licenses, security, insurance, anything, home ownership, anything that they could ruin through child support. So they said, okay, if you fall behind on your child support, we're going to take this privilege away legally. And so they basically now ruined a bunch of middle-class men who were making middle-class incomes by making it impossible for them to work. And this had a catastrophic, cascading domino effect on the black woman. So they killed two birds with one stone with this. But, it's pretty much a done deal. Most of this goddess stuff is basically women flaunting their sexuality and sex appeal, basically seeking glory without works, which is what was going on with all of these movements in the past. Basically providing infinite hope without an ounce of accountability. In the civil rights movement, I don't think that's what the leaders then had in mind, that blacks would abandon their own stuff. That's not what they had in mind with civil rights. They wanted blacks to have the rights of every human being, but they didn't want them to give up their own culture and embrace the culture of someone else. And I think this is the same thing happening with the goddess stuff. The woman is saying, well, I'm beautiful, I'm this, I'm that, I'm glorious, I'm that. But, they're giving up the more important things, the family, the community, the culture. I don't think that that's going to work. You have to have accountability. And the goddess doesn't want accountability. In the same way that the higher consciousness brothers of the 90s did not want to take accountability. They didn't want accountability. They want the hope the white people are going to fix their society, our problems are out there. If whites just stop doing what they're doing, everything's going to be okay. But they're not taking accountability for their own actions. And so, we have another situation where another decade is going by, where we're putting all our effort into protesting and marching and complaining, but not changing the fundamental internal things that are screaming to be changed. I think the goddess decade is going to go down as one of the worst decades in history for the black man. It's partly his fault, because it's also the decade of the silent man. After Obama got in office, black men felt there's no need anymore for me to raise my voice and speak up. And black men just went silent. And ever since then, they haven't really spoken about anything. For the most part, that the leadership is more or less a vacuum. Black men aren't supporting anyone, aren't promoting any issues anymore. And I don't think that's a good strategy. All right, that's the Chronicles. That's my rant for the night. And, you know, there are bright spots about these decades. There are things that did happen that I think were good things. And in a future episode, we're going to talk about that. That's called the star cycle. And that's a topic, I think, dealing with the cycles in Black history that I think you're going to find really going to open your eyes to some things. This is Master Yao. These are the Chronicles of Master Yao. Good night.